Good evening, everyone. If I can encourage you to find a seat. It's so good to see so many people here for this event, and welcome to all those who are joining online. It's wonderful to have you with us, this opportunity. And I can safely say there are many friends and family members, colleagues, former students, current students at Moorlands College in the room today. And some folk, for this is the first time here to Moorlands College, if that's you, you're tremendously welcome. Feel at liberty in this place. And we're really excited for what tonight offers. I've got to do a couple of boring bits. If you're online, you need to know nothing about the fire situation. But I'll tell everybody else anyway. If the fire alarm should sound, it is a real deal. And it could be burnt toast, who knows. But we'll head outside of the doors, any of the fire exits, and our meeting point is over in the car park. There are toilets in the foyer, ladies to my left and gentlemen to my right. There is opportunity to purchase a book at halfway point. So we'll be breaking at that stage. We do ask students who are currently at the college and staff members just to hold back, because we've got a finite number of copies and we can order in extra copies just for you. I almost said extra coffees just then. We've got 2 in the house, Ruth and Ian, and that's sufficient for tonight. Wonderful. I'm going to pray over this evening and then hand over to my friend Ian Coffey, who's going to introduce our guest tonight. So, Father, we thank you for this opportunity to pause in our busy schedules, in our busy lives, to think about the things that really matter, to think about family, to think about friends, to listen to a story and multiple stories, to learn what we can so that we're better equipped to support others and to understand our place in the world. We give you thanks. And we particularly just want to celebrate life tonight and celebrate those that you give us, the time that we have with them. Pray tonight would be significant for us all. In Jesus' name, amen. I'm going to hand over to Ian, who's going to lead us through and introduce those on the panel.
Thank you. And if you pop that there, can I add my welcome to Andy's? It's great to see you here. And for those of you who are online, a big welcome to you as well. Glad that you can join us. The programme as such is going to run till about 22, quarter to 9. Then there'll be a break, you'll be glad to know. That's a chance for you to buy a book if you wish to, have some refreshments, make yourself comfortable. So that will be at about quarter to. But I want you to welcome 2 people who really are the focus of this evening. Kathy Cole, who's written the book Through Thick and Thin, Journeying Through Grief with God, which tells her story of working through the loss of Rick, her son, and a wonderful book. And she's going to talk a little bit about the writing of that and what inspired it. But also to Helen Cole, Rick's widow. And we're so glad that they've been willing to come and share their stories and their memories tonight. So please really welcome Kathy and Helen. Couple of seats there, couple of microphones, and I hope you'll be comfortable. Kathy, you came in from Sussex today with David. Was the journey okay?
Yes, it's fine, thank you.
Good. I think it is on, isn't it? Yeah, we got a thumbs up, so it is. Helen, you didn't travel quite as far. And what some people won't know is, of course, you're on the staff here.
I am, yes.
Tell us what you do.
So I am the placements coordinator here, which means I oversee all of the placements that the students do as part of their course. And I'm a lecturer on the BA and the foundation year courses. Wow.
This evening's about Rick. Why don't you tell us the story of you and Rick? And I know in saying that you could take the whole evening, but just tell us about you and Rick and how you met.
Sure. Cool. Thanks, Sam. Yes. So, where to begin? Because Ian says this could easily take all night with all the stories, and it's it's a joy to see some of the people who have been on this journey with us in the room tonight, and I know joining us online as well. So I just want to echo what Andy and Ian have both said in terms of welcome, and just, blown away by the support here tonight. So as Ian said, I'm on staff here. Before I was on staff here, I was a student here, and I never left. So I started here in 2010 as a student. My background before that was working with YWAM, Youth with a Mission, and I'd spend every year taking teams abroad, spending 2 or 3 months in another country, doing missions work, seeing God at work, and again, many stories that don't have time for tonight. But I felt God calling me into deeper studies, and so came here in 2010. And I really do have to celebrate the community that Moorlands is here. Fantastic group of friends that I made straight off the bat. And again, some are here tonight and some are online as well. And one of those amazing friends that I met was Rick. So let's see if this is going to work. Oh. Aha, here we go. So a couple of pictures just to embarrass a couple of people from our cohorts as well. So out of the top picture in the straw hat on the right-hand side is Rick. And community life here was great. I say lots of great times. When Rick and I met, there was no attraction between us. Actually, to be completely honest, we both were in separate relationships when we were here at college in our first year. And although I do still remember one of the best men at our wedding saying that, I think his quote was something along the lines of, as soon as they ditched their respective partners, we knew they'd be perfect together, which was nice and embarrassing in the middle of our wedding. But yeah, we had a fantastic time. So we were really close friends. Nobody, I think, saw the relationship developing. And then it was halfway through our second year that we started to realise there was something a bit more. I think it was over one of the college half terms we had a 3-hour-long phone call and suddenly went, hang on a minute here. It was something we both prayed about. We both said, if we're going to get into this relationship, it's going to be for life. There was a friendship at stake. We didn't want to risk that. And in praying about it, I was sorting through some paperwork and I came across something from many years ago. I'd come out of a difficult relationship and off the back of that said, right, Lord, I'm not getting into another relationship unless it's right. And I made a list, a very precise list, a very picky list of what my ideal man should be like. And Rick ticked every box. And that was, I think, God's kind of light bulb to me saying, this is right. And there we go. A couple of pictures from our years at college. It was, nobody saw the relationship coming, so we had even more fun with it. We announced it through social media, as you always do. No relationship is official till it's on Facebook. And we announced it on April Fool's Day. Apologies to those of you who are here or online who fell for that and were like, no, of course it's not true. But it was. So we got engaged in our final year and then got married in the February of 2014. We deliberately chose a winter wedding. We decided not to try and combine planning a wedding with our final year studies, but kind of pushed it back a bit into the February, a very blustery day. And one of my fondest memories from that day is getting out of the car and the veil leaving my head and being caught by another guest who just happened to be nearby as I got out of the car. It was a wonderful day, fantastic. And we started married life together. We were both on staff here by that point as well. Rick joined the PR team as a graphic designer and doing events. And at the same time was the children, youth and family worker at Rosebery Park Baptist Church. So very busy setting up youth work, getting the kids club off the ground, running holiday clubs. And we were both looking ahead to future ministry. We were at the point where we were starting to discuss who would get to do their master's degree first. Rick was looking at going into training for the Baptist Union to become a Baptist minister. I was looking at doing my master's to continue my work here at Moorlands and kind of develop my teaching side. And that was kind of where we were at. And then in the January of 2015, Rick caught a cold. I can't jazz it up any more than that. He had a virus, a sore throat, a cough, a bit of a temperature. He saw the GP because it wasn't easing, and the GP said, yes, it's a virus, go home. Saw another GP who said the same thing. Saw another GP on the Thursday who said, okay, we don't know why it's not shifting, take some antibiotics and come back on Monday for some blood tests. I went to the kids' club on Friday night as usual and came home. Now, it wasn't unusual for Rick to feel ill on antibiotics, so when he got up in the night, that wasn't unusual. We quickly realised it wasn't symptoms of the antibiotics, phoned 111 and an ambulance. They sent a community responder who happened to be round the corner in Bransgore. We only lived up here in Burton. And an ambulance quickly followed. So I was amazed by how quickly we had professionals on the scene. Without going into the details, which isn't relevant tonight, Rick went into cardiac arrest and was taken to Bournemouth Hospital. They were unable to restart his heart, and he died in the early hours on January 31st, 2015.
That was just 1 week short of your first wedding anniversary.
Yeah, our wedding anniversary was the 8th of February. So yeah, it was we'd been married 11 months and 3 weeks. I'm going to put up one more picture because it's one of my favourite pictures, because I think it's one of the last photos that we have of Rick. And this was from our staff Christmas meal in the December. It wasn't an easy night. It wasn't an easy Saturday in the journey that followed. Rick's cause of death in the post-mortem that followed has gone down on the death certificate as sudden adult death syndrome. And what that means is there is no medical reason. The paramedics didn't miss anything that night. The doctors that had spoken to Rick in the week didn't miss anything. There is no reason as to why Rick died that morning.
Which left you with not only a huge sense of loss and pain, but with a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Questions for God.
I very quickly realised there was no human element here. There was nobody where I could direct any emotion, any blame, any questions. All my questions were directed straight to God. There was no other reason, no other logic.
You and Kathy and David are coming up to the 10th anniversary in the new year. How have you resolved some of those questions?
It's been a long journey. Looking back, I can see God's hand in small details, which isn't always easy to admit. I'll be honest, it's still not easy at times to say this is where I can see God at work. I think a defining moment for me on the journey was asking all the why questions at God and trying to find the answers. And the answer I heard back one day was God saying to me, no answer would be enough. And hearing that floored me, really, to kind of realise that honestly, that yes, if I was able to stand face to face with God and ask that question directly, there is no reason that God could give me that I would be okay with. Mm. And that was a really hard realisation to make, to get to. But to then have no choice but to lean back on God's sovereignty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that, but I want to give Kathy an opportunity just to come in at that point and to talk about the book. Through thick and thin. Why the title, and when did you decide to write this book?
I think about a few weeks after Rick died, I felt really strongly that I needed to record everything that was happening, how I was what I was thinking, how I was feeling, and everything that God was teaching me and the way he was providing for me. And I think the idea of the book was there at that very beginning. I wasn't thinking about it a great deal. I had too many other things to think about and cope with. But I think I knew that's why I started keeping a journal. And I knew that was why I was doing it. But once I started doing it, then I found that journaling actually really helped me on my journey. It was a wonderful way to process. And I found that by putting my thoughts down on paper, it stopped them going round and round and round in my head. And that was really helpful.
And you knew at that point that you were going to have the opportunity to write it in some form?
I thought it would be quite a long time in the future, but yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Through Thick and Thin?
That title came from something that Rick wrote. He wrote something for his church magazine in the January. I've never actually read the original article, but what I have read is what his minister wrote after he died for the March copy of the magazine. And she said that he'd written about biblical characters who follow God through thick and thin, and then she said that Rick followed God through thick and thin. And I just thought, that's what I've had to do, and that was in the title.
The book is a fascinating read. When you sent it to me in manuscript form, I think when I wrote back, I said it's a fascinating read. And you chose a kind of a motif through about you and David walking. And it was a particular walk in Northumberland?
Northumberland, yeah.
Why did you choose that?
Because I was really struggling. I'd read through my journals and I knew there was a book there, but I couldn't work out how to write it, the structure of it. And I was trying to also think of some way of portraying things in picture form, because I like sort of thinking of things in pictures. I found them helpful. And I was thinking that a lot of what we were doing was like walking through a bog and trying to find your way. And as I thought about that, I thought about this walk in Northumberland, which had been particularly bad for that. And then I realised that other parts of the walk had parallels with my journey. And that then gave me the structure for the book, because I could write some of it chronologically, and I could also pick out themes. That's how that.
And that works really well, because your journey, you parallel with the walk, and some of the struggles on the walk, and the fact that it was a lot longer than you thought it was going to be, and all that kind of thing. Same question that I asked of Helen. With the questions that you had for God, what were you doing with those?
Like Helen said, it's over a long time that you're trying to process them. I have written one chapter of the book is about the questions that I've asked. I don't think that a lot of the questions you just don't get answers to. They're too difficult. And at the end, I had to sort of say, well, God is God. And if I try, I'm never going to understand him. I'm never going to understand why this has happened. And I came to the point where I got to make a decision. Either you trust God or you don't. With all these questions still unanswered, you'd still got to make a decision about whether you trusted him or not. And I decided that I did trust him.
And was there a specific point that you can look at when that happened?
No, I think it was a gradual process. And I think by writing the book, I realised where I got to.
Yeah, the journey.
Yeah.
Helen, one of the things you do here is you teach pastoral care.
I do.
And pastoral care covers a whole range of things, including bereavement.
Yeah.
Has that helped you, what you've been through?
I think it has, and I mean, it's nice actually to have some of the pastoral care students here with us tonight, which is really lovely. And I think, yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to be part of that module, to teach on it. And I do share my story and share what's happened with the students as part of it. And it's a wonderful opportunity in a safe space to kind of talk through some of the realities of grief and bereavement from a personal experience side as well, rather than a textbook and theory approach, and then to talk about the pastoral side and some of the do's, some of the don'ts, some guidance, and some kind of practical kind of here's some things to have in your toolkit and resources.
Because that is a challenge, isn't it? Because sometimes people who are doing pastoral care may never have experienced the bereavement that you and Kathy have been through.
No, it does tend to floor some people a little bit.
Yeah.
But part of the reason I do it, I often find, and I think it's been my experience over the last few years, in society, we don't like talking about death, we don't like talking about bereavement. It's an awkward subject. If it's brought up, it can lower the mood in a room very quickly and bring awkwardness. And my heart is to try and lower that and actually make spaces where it can be talked about and kind of reduce what I say with the students, reduce the deer in headlights look. When somebody says they've been bereaved, our reaction is often, oh, panic, I now don't know what to say, and we clam up, and I want to reduce some of that and some of that stigma around it. And that's why I'm so open with the students, which I think, does throw a curveball for some of them when they haven't known that's coming.
And Kathy, in the book, you do talk about people's reaction to you and David through grief.
Yes.
Tell us what you learned.
Some people ignore you. I describe in the book an incident when I was coming out of Tesco's with my trolley full of shopping, and a man was walking in and he saw me and he looked absolutely horrified to see me, and I thought, he doesn't want to speak to me. So I shoved the trolley as hard as I could and rushed past him saying hello as I went past. But it's things like, I hate making people feel uncomfortable like that.
Yeah.
So for me, often it meant I withdrew. Because I didn't want to put people in that position, and I shouldn't have had to do that. And
you pushed the trolley too hard.
I did, yes. As you go out, there's a slope going down to the oncoming traffic, and I had a bit of a problem with that.
Isn't that strange that people don't want to talk to you?
I think it is, but I think I can understand it in some ways because, as Alan said, people feel uncomfortable with it, and they don't know what to say to you, and you know, I was quite happy just to talk about the weather. It didn't need to be a big issue.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And another thing which I found really helpful in the book was you found, going back to the church where you and David were very heavily involved, Rick was heavily involved, you found that difficult.
I didn't go back for months. There were just too many memories. And I'd done a lot of the children's work with Rick. He'd had 2 gap years, and we'd done holiday clubs and other things together. And I also found the music a huge issue because he played in the services, so that was a memory. And then I used to sit with him in his bedroom while he was playing on the keyboard, and he'd play some of the things that he liked, and we'd talk about the songs. And so music was there was just so many memories wrapped up in that I just couldn't face it. So in the end, a friend's husband, who was a curate at another church, suggested I went to the Anglican church to a midweek communion where there was no singing, and it was just a quiet, reflective service, and that was just what I needed, and I eventually ended up going to that church rather than the other church. But.
And you're not alone. Many people say that the familiar way of doing things needs a break, and often a church service that has got space and liturgy, because liturgy is actually quite helpful for that reason. We haven't got words, but they're written down, and they've been a comfort to Christians for hundreds and hundreds of years. What about you, Helen? Because I know music was a trigger, because for those who didn't know Rick, he was a brilliant musician. He really was exceptional. How many instruments did he play, Kathy?
Keyboard, flute, guitar.
And drums, occasionally.
Oh, did he?
I'll tell that story in a second. You might not know this one.
But we benefited at college. The only time I've sung in a choir with a tone-deaf conductor. Explain that for those who don't understand. So,
yeah, Rick was a fantastic musician, but singing was not his forte, shall we say. But he absolutely loved music and was so passionate about music that when it came up to the Christmas season one year here at Moorlands, I think it was our second year here, he started a choir here in the college, and it was a choir not just for the students but for the staff as well. And it was the staff and the students coming together to form a choir. We then stood, if you know the campus, there's a basketball court just over there, and we stood in the basketball court in December performing together, and it was absolutely a wonderful achievement.
It was.
I have a fond memory. Rick was in the chapel band here, and we had this was before this amazing building was here, and the chapel was elsewhere on campus, and they'd been playing during the chapel service, and it got to the final song where they were doing "Oh Happy Day," and the drummer had disappeared. The drummer wasn't in the service anymore. So Rick, while sat at the keyboard, dragged over the kick drum from the drum kit and was doing the intro on the kick drum while playing the keyboard and getting us going for "Oh Happy Day." And just utterly blown away by that talent.
And he came alive when he was doing music, didn't he? It was his way of expressing himself.
Yeah.
But you had, similar to Kathy, there were challenges you faced about familiar worship and buildings and singing.
Yeah, there are still songs today that if they come on in the chapel service here, or if I'm out in public and a song comes on, I will find a way to discreetly leave the room, if possible, sometimes at a quicker pace. It's hard. It brings back so many memories. I think one of the things that's often underappreciated about grief is all the secondary losses. It's not just the person that's died that we miss and we grieve. It's everything else. It's everything that no longer is going to happen in the future that we'd planned for. It's everything that we associate with them. It was difficult. I love the people at Rosebery Park dearly, and you guys all know that, but it was very hard for me to go back to Rosebery Park that had been such a huge part of our ministry together, and kind of our home. I found similar with the liturgy and songs of God's goodness and God's faithfulness, and all of that was just alien to me. But instead focusing where I could on worship songs that were God's sovereignty and God's character and the almost that transcendence of God. I can't think how to put it into words properly.
Yeah.
But that was a bit slightly more, I guess, abstract than that personal relationship was where I connected.
And the triggers still come?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And for you, Kathy?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what do you do? I know what you do. What do you do?
I can mostly stay in a service now when I get to music, but I'm kind of holding my breath and I'm trying not to listen to the music and I'm trying to think about something else. I keep getting these pictures of Rick coming through my head, and the music just seems to be sort of drumming it into me, and it makes me panic, I think.
Yes.
So yeah, I can usually get through them now, but
bringing things up to date. I mean, it's wonderful that you, the two of you, with David, have maintained this relationship. Tell folks what has happened since Rick's death 10 years ago.
Well, which bit in particular? Because I mean, there's been a lot happened.
The link that you have.
Yeah, it's amazing. We Skype pretty much every week as a family, and we visit. There's one passion, I guess, that Rick and I shared, and that we then passed on to you guys, was a love of board games, and especially like strategy board games. And it's been wonderful to kind of still share that joy and kind of come to visit with a big bag of games and share that together. But yeah, I wouldn't want to ever lose this link.
That is quite unique though, isn't it?
I'm very, very grateful that Helen's still part of our life.
Yeah.
because I wouldn't have wanted to lose her too.
Bringing us up to date, you have remarried.
I have.
Tell us why I introduced you with a double-barreled name.
Yeah. So I remarried in 2020 to Dave. I'm going to embarrass him because he's here in the room tonight as well. It was a long journey for me to decide whether or not to remarry, whether to date again. I still remember Ian talking with you and being adamant it was never going to happen. I didn't want to let go of grief. I didn't want to move on. It was something I was determined that to move forward, to be happy again, would be completely disrespecting Rick and completely dishonouring. It was supposed to be for life. But I met Dave. He's been very patient, very loving. When I've pushed him away, he's been patient and waited for me. And we made the decision when we got married to double barrel. So I am Helen Howells Cole. So Howells being Dave's name and Cole, I'm taking my badge off, being Rick's. And Dave has also taken the double-barreled surname. So we take Rick forward in our relationship, in our marriage. I don't want his memory to be forgotten.
How did that make you feel, Kathy?
I was absolutely blown away by that, actually. Right from quite early on, I was hoping that Helen would remarry. But that doesn't mean it wasn't really hard for me when it actually happened. But, I mean, Dave has made it as easy as he possibly can. He's shown so much respect for Rick. And he's a lovely guy anyway. So, yes, we're very fond of him.
And when you did your MA here, which you graduated, I lose track of time, how?
2019. Yeah.
On your certificate?
Yeah, so I did my dissertation on the topic of lament, which was in a lot inspired and kind of a way to process some of my grief. Dave got my master's certificate framed, and on the frame has had it engraved saying, "For Rick." Which, yeah.
Wonderful. You said you did your dissertation on lament. For quite a few of us, that was a raised eyebrows moment. Just talk us through the choice and how it helped you.
Yeah, so it was something that had been on my heart, I guess, for quite a while, going back quite a long time. I remember being in a worship service one day, going through a really tough time, wrestling with God over some stuff. I think I spent most of the service in tears, clutching a hot cup of tea. And I was approached to and asked why I hadn't been engaged in worship that morning, which, yeah, was not the best example of pastoral care. And it kind of got me thinking then about what does worship look like. And then after Rick died, the question rose its head again. I had so many questions, as we've said, and all the why questions, and everything was directed, I say, at God. I never stopped believing. I couldn't. And it sounds odd to say, but even in Rick's death, I could see God's hand, which isn't easy to admit. So I can never stop believing. I've experienced too much of God in other contexts to not believe, but I didn't trust him. But I found that saying that to people caused panic. And people didn't know how to respond when I said I didn't trust God. My prayer life, if I'm honest, was stronger than ever. I was probably praying more than I'd ever prayed because I was crying out for answers. And so it started this journey into what lament looks like, exploring the Psalms, especially Psalm 88 was one of my key texts. If you've not read it, I encourage you to have a look. It's a hard psalm to read. There's no praise in it. It ends on the note of darkness. But it's in our Bibles. It's there for a reason, and I'm not going to go off on a tangent as to how much we can learn from it. That's perhaps for another time. But there's so much power in those psalms and in expressing that emotion directly to God and keeping that open dialogue. And I wanted to explore that further.
So, you're right, Psalm 88 is quite a depressing read. But how did you draw comfort from it?
I think because although it's so depressing, it keeps God at the centre. So the psalmist is dialoguing directly with God, and although there isn't a note of praise, there is a note of hope underneath it, because the psalmist is trusting that God is going to bring him through it. And that shows in the way the cries are repeated and kind of echoed throughout the psalm, that the psalmist knows that God is there, that God is going to bring him through and bring some sort of change, some sort of comfort, even if he doesn't know it in that moment. It ends on that. You can feel the note of trust beneath it, which is what I held on to.
Kathy, did you read it?
The dissertation, yes. Yeah.
What did you feel?
Fortunately, I'd written the chapter in the book, which includes some of the sort of thing that Helen was writing about. So yes, it rang a bell with me, definitely.
Because lament is not something we talk about, is it?
No, it's not.
You know,
Although I think it's slightly talked about more. I keep coming across it recently, actually.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Do you think that was the pandemic that maybe?
Could well be, yes.
Because there was a lot of grief through the pandemic that people couldn't express, could they? There was no space for that. If you've got a funeral that's limited to 8 people or, restricted conversation. But lament is there. It's a theme in Scripture throughout. I'm going to get you to read something in a minute. But before we do that, Helen, what's helped you in that journey? I mean, lots of things have helped you. But if there was one thing...
Can I have 2?
All right, 2.
I have 2.
It's near Christmas.
Yeah. I think going back to kind of, I guess, what we were saying earlier was I was blown away by the army of support and just the people that rallied round and just people that were unafraid to kind of sit in the chaos, for want of a better phrase, that would just come and be, that would phone, that would give me permission just to be myself. People that turned up with practical support, grocery shopping. I remember Andy took the students, my tutor group, he took them to Sainsbury's, and they put together a care package for me as a tutor group activity, and Andy delivered that. So all of those things, were hugely supportive. But I think the other thing Sam, can I have that last slide? I think the other thing that's just kind of, I think over the last few years, especially I've been reflecting on, is recognising, I'll read out that, it's a bit hard to see on the screen, but recognising that grief is not, there is no time limit on grief. It's a journey, and it's always going to be part of the journey. As Ian said, we're approaching the 10 years, but there are times it still feels like it was yesterday. This is an image I came across, and it says, imagine that you are this bookshelf, and grief were this thick, heavy, and permanent book sitting in it. Over time, that book doesn't change in shape or size. It just stays there and becomes a part of you. As the days and years pass, your library grows around it, as everything you add to the shelf becomes another chapter and dimension in your life. The grief, even if you choose to gloss over it, is an indelible presence juxtaposed with the growing collection of things. The spine might fade in the sunlight, yellowing pages will fall out, and its cover will definitely gather dust. But our grief is a book whose pages we can flip through and go back to when we feel compelled to. Without changing in weight, significance, or meaning, it shall always and simply be another facet of our existence and one of many stories in our constantly changing life. I think that's that realisation that Rick is always going to be a part of me and a part of my story. There is no time limit. There's no getting over it or kind of moving on. And that's normal, that's good, and that's healthy. And that brought me so much freedom to talk about him, to share like this together. Yeah.
And I see at the bottom there, day 1,843, which is that symbol.
Yeah, there is no end.
Did the two of you ever think back in January 2015 you'd be able to sit here in front of a crowd of people and talk?
Definitely not, no.
No. Although I have to say, at Rick's Thanksgiving service, which was very, very memorable at Rosebery Park, the two of you spoke, and it was so powerful. Never forgotten that. So God was with you in that period, and is with you today.
It was always Rick's prayer to see that church full of people.
Yeah.
And we saw it that day.
Yeah. I want to just read something to you. It's horrible when people quote you out of a book. I'll say that. It really is. But you went to Scargill community up in Yorkshire, and it was a retreat. And there was an opportunity for you to go forward, for everyone to go forward for prayer. You went forward for prayer, and whoever it was praying asked you, "How can I pray for you?" And you said, "I have a broken heart."
It wasn't quite like that. No, I'd kind of reached the end of the road. There was so many other things, sort of really serious life events that were happening to us, one after the other, and sometimes they were even overlapping, that a lot of the time I couldn't even think about the bereavement. I was just dealing with everything that was happening. And this went on for 2.5 years, and I just got to the point where I couldn't carry on. And I felt God was telling me to go on this bereavement retreat, and I really didn't want to, but it kept on and on coming in my mind. So in the end I went, and I stayed for healing just because I just felt my life was a total mess. I wrote in my journal that I felt beyond help. That was how bad I felt. And as the person was praying for me, the words broken heart came into my mind, and I knew that's what I was there for. And I think that was the point at which I accepted that my heart was broken. I accepted and acknowledged that my heart was broken. I think because I was trying so hard to survive, and I had to believe I could survive, I couldn't totally accept and acknowledge how bad it was. I mean, I knew how bad I was feeling, but it's another thing to actually acknowledge it, I think. And I'd reached that point where I did.
And you talk about a poem called Broken Pieces, written by Helen Brocklehurst, who's part of the community, based on the Japanese art of mending pottery. So when something's been shattered, it's stuck back together, and you say in the book, the broken pieces are repaired with a special lacquer containing gold, silver, or platinum, so that the repair is visible, and the result is the repaired pottery is similar but different. That is a very powerful image. We're coming to a break. Would you read the poem? Just to encourage you, it's not 42 pages long. It's just 4 verses.
I thought I had it firmly in my grip, but then that momentary slip, and now it lies there, shattered, a thing that really mattered, broken pieces scattered on the floor, and something that was precious is no more. Desperately I scrabble around, gather up the pieces from the ground, but as I try, despair increases. I can't mend these broken pieces. My futile effort ceases. I'm not sure. Are they really precious anymore? They'll never be the way they were before. He takes each broken fragment, every shard, the bits I would give up on and discard. He makes them new, yet recognised, both familiar and disguised. I'd never dreamed or realised what he can do with broken pieces, making something new.
Thank you, Kathy and Helen. We are going to take a break at this point, and I want to encourage you. The book is available. If you are a Moorlands student or staff member, hear what Andy said. We've got a limited number. So just hold back, because what we can do through Jethro, who's on the desk there, we can order you a copy and get it to you before the end of term. But because we've got so many guests, we want them to come at the front of the queue, if that's okay. We're going to break. We'll be back probably about 10 past. If you are at home, put the kettle on, don't watch the telly, and we'll be back. And it's an opportunity for questions. It's been so good that you've answered so honestly and openly tonight. But there may be questions that you want to ask, and we want to give you that opportunity. And we'll have somebody with a roving mic, and Helen and Kathy are happy to try and respond in any way that they can, if it might be of help to you. The book is brilliant. It really is such a help. And when Kathy sent it me in manuscript form, my thought was, this is going to help people. And it may be that you're in a place where loss and grief are your story, or it may be you've got a friend or a member of your family who doesn't find it easy to talk about these things. It's the sort of book that will help them, because it's real on every page. Thank you, Helen and Kathy. Appreciate what you gave us. And I should say that Kathy's happy to sign copies. And she'll just be next to Jethro up at the back there. But do grab some refreshments. Remember what Andy said about the loos, ladies on the left, gents on the right, and make use of this opportunity. Thank you. That'd be good. Hannah is going to be my microphone lady. And we've lost. Oh, there's Hannah. We thought an open mic would be good, and one or two of you mentioned that to me. Really glad that we've got some questions. Can I just sort of lay out the groundwork? I'm sure some of us here have got very, very real personal stories, but this isn't the space to share them. Does that make sense? Can I say that without being rude? That's not minimising in any way. In fact, it's the opposite. It's realising that if you've got a personal story, it deserves a lot more space than we can give it here. But we're glad that you're here. But if you're able to just succinctly, perhaps you want to say, look, I lost a child, I lost a partner, that's fine. But rather than going into all of the detail and taking up lots of time, is that all right? And sorry if that's offensive. It's not meant to be. It's coming from I hope, a really good heart. Hannah, where have you gone, Hannah? Oh, there. Hannah will come round to you if you want to ask a question. She will not let go of the microphone. Not because she's naughty, but because you never let go of a microphone when you're in an open audience like this. So, and if there's any wrestling going on, I'll come and sort it out. Andy has been sat on his laptop and you've been filtering some questions. Are you in a position to offer edited versions?
Okay, just a question from online. I think this one's really a good place to start. What do you think are the biggest blind spots that you feel that those in church leadership have when it comes to supporting and journeying with someone who's experienced a sudden bereavement? And I wonder if, Ian might want to feel a bit of that as well as a church leader himself. But yeah.
Oh, there we go. We're on. Do you want to start? Or do you want me to?
What you're thinking. I would say, and I've learned this way, we think the person who is being bereaved doesn't want to talk about their loved one. In fact, they do. And the best thing you can do is to talk about their loved one, to use their name, and to ask things about them, because that gives permission and shows that you're not afraid to do that. And I know that when I was much younger than I am, as a pastor, I used to find that so hard. But I realised that it's important because that person is still alive within their memory, theologically, more alive than they've ever been. But it's good to mention their name.
No, I'd agree with that. I think I was also going to add, kind of thinking back, and I guess linked as well with the research I've been doing into lament, and I say the sometimes challenge that's brought into conversations with people is, I think sometimes in leadership or in kind of pastoral care roles, there's we feel we need to defend God and provide the answers. And when somebody is searching and asking those questions, there's a pressure, I think, especially for those in leadership, to have the answer and to give the spiritual platitudes that, well, don't worry, God's in control. You know, God brings together all things for good for those who trust. And those platitudes, I appreciate they are very well-meaning and come from a good place. But in a moment of grief and bereavement, that's not what the person needs to hear. Actually, I was like, nothing's working for good right now. I remember a friend talking to me about the passage that says, you know, what father, when his son asks for a fish, gives him a stone? And I just sat there and said, well, it's raining stones on me right now. There is no fish in sight. Because there were many things that happened in the weeks and the months following Rick's death that just felt like we were still being pelted. And people didn't have the answers, but that's okay. We don't need to defend God, don't need to provide the answers. Just, I say, sit in the pain, sit with people. That's what people need.
I think I was fairly fortunate when I went to the midweek service. The vicar of that church knew about my situation, and she came up and she said to me, "Can I come and see you?" And I sort of very politely said, "Oh, yes, okay." And what I didn't realise was that God was providing me with somebody to walk alongside me on the journey. And I didn't know I needed it, and I wasn't looking for it, but God knew I needed it, and I don't know what I'd have done without her, to be honest. And she really listened. She listened properly. She very rarely gave me any advice. She didn't criticise. She accepted everything I said. She didn't try to correct me. She was just there with me in it, and that was absolutely what I needed.
That's Veronica?
Yes.
And you didn't know her before Rick's death?
No.
Wow, that's a wonderful thing. Friendship. Yeah, I had a friend of mine who was in the last stages of cancer. I remember his comment to me was, don't let the cliches get you down. Because sometimes the cliches just are hard to bear. Andy, have you got another there? Oh, someone over there. Hannah.
One of the things you mentioned was that you found God more abstract and you found it difficult to trust him. How did you learn how to trust God again?
Big question. A long journey, and a lot of, I think, reminding myself who God is, and trying to hold on to the bigger picture. There was a book that massively helped me. I've got time for a quick story on it, haven't I? So the book is called Totally Forgiving God by R.T. Kendall. So R.T. Kendall has done a series on the Totally Forgiving series, and he's done one on Totally Forgiving God. Similar to what Kathy was just saying, I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't in a place at that point to forgive God. My family, my aunt and uncle and my cousin took me to the Word Alive conference in 2016. After I'd accepted going on the conference and everything was booked, only then did they reveal that the theme of the conference was Job's suffering. Talk about God's sense of humour. And when I go to these kind of conferences, the first thing I always do is hit the bookshop and have a look round. And first day, I'd been good. I looked what was there and made a list of what was available in the bookshop and what I might want to come back and buy by the end of the week. And I studied that bookshop pretty carefully, quite thoroughly. And it was partway through the week. I can't remember exactly what Vaughan Roberts' talk was on. I just remember sitting there thinking, I don't want to hear this right now. I'm not in this place. And I walked back into the bookshop, and in the middle of the bookshop was one of the circular stands. And on that stand was R.T. Kendall's Totally Forgiving God. And it was the only copy in the bookshop. And it had not been there earlier that week. And that was the start of kind of my faith turning round. R.T. Kendall talks about the betrayal barrier and kind of when our knowledge of God and our experiences don't line up. And so working through that and getting to a place of forgiveness. But it took a long time to read that book and actually work through it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thanks for that question. Right down the front. I told you, Hannah, you're going to get your steps up.
Kind of a related question, I guess. I'm really quite fascinated about how your understanding of the nature and the character of God has changed. It sounds to me as if there's been a movement from, certainty into greater mystery. Perhaps echoing some of the understanding of the medieval mystics who realised that it's only in unknowing that we can know anything about God. So I'm just curious how your understanding of the nature and the character of God has changed or grown and developed through this experience.
I think for me, and then I'll hand the microphone for Kathy as well, but I think for me it was, especially, I keep coming back to it, but the phrase God's sovereignty. I say we throw the phrases around, that God is in control, God is over everything. But I think it wasn't until kind of experiencing everything that we've been through and, I say, seeing where God's hand has been in kind of really recognising kind of God's sovereignty in that, and that balance between a God who is so immanent and close and personal and yet is so huge and, like you say, the mystery and so much bigger. That's what I always come back to.
I think for me, what I knew of God was as a very important starting point for then asking the questions that I had. And I had to keep coming back to that and reminding myself about God's love, the sovereignty of God, and the majesty and the power of God, and that he was in control. That was the sort of the basis from which I could then ask my questions. I don't think any of that has changed for me, but I think I'm more aware maybe of the mystery of God, that there's so much that we can never understand. I mean, he's God. If we understood him, he wouldn't be God. And it's almost like recognising your own smallness as much as God's bigness.
Yeah. Thank you. Andy's got his hand up again. Andy's sitting there with all the online chat, and he's trying to put it together.
Yeah, there's a couple here which are quite similar in some senses. It's about how a church responds, and so, how as a church can we be effectively supporting and helping those suffering loss, both in the church but also in the wider community. And there's a follow-on question there, which if you can, for those who have hope of the resurrection while you're accepting the reality of death and loss, how can you support those who are suffering? How do you hold those in tension? So you believe in the resurrection, but also you accept the reality of death and loss. But a couple of questions around how we as churches respond. How can we effectively do that?
Any ideas, ladies?
With the death and the resurrection, I think it was the resurrection and the fact that I would see Rick again one day, which kept me going. I don't know how people cope without that.
I think for me, again, it's something that came out, in through my research with lament. But I remember coming across a quote, I won't get it verbatim, but it pretty much said that recognising that events that we have in the church calendar that are often moments of celebration, the quote was something along the lines of that these moments hold a palm branch in one hand and a dagger in the other. And recognising that the moments that we often see as celebration and kind of bringing communities together are fantastic, and we don't want to lose that, but recognising that actually for some people those days are really challenging. Things like Christmas, like Mother's Day, Father's Day, things like that. And I do think it's something the church is getting better at, and it's something I have seen within churches is that recognition. But I think there are other opportunities, therefore, within the church calendar and building things to do with lament and kind of the honesty of emotions into services so that the church becomes a place where people feel comfortable. So when as I mentioned about Psalm 88, another phrase that I came across, and it struck me really hard. It said, the church is not a good place to be when you're feeling Psalm 88. And that's quite sad. And the church should be a place where people who are in that place can go. And so I think incorporating elements of lament just throughout church structure and life and service elements in home groups kind of makes it a safer place than when people do come into challenges to know somewhere that they can go. For people in the community as well to know that the church is a welcoming place where they can get support. Just breaks down those barriers, breaks through that stigma, and helps us all be more real with one another.
And he used that phrase, holding in tension. And my mind, when he said that, went back to Ruth and I standing with you in the garden tomb on Easter Day, however many years ago it was. Do you remember how many?
2017.
2017. Yeah. That's 2 years after Rick called home. So we were there with 3,000 Christians at the sunrise service, and that was one of 5 services that day, something like that. And you were in floods of tears, and yet the whole theme of the service was the glory of the resurrection. And so we hold together that it is a place where we can be broken, but also a place of rejoicing. And the thing I've wrestled with for years is John 11. Jesus is about to raise Lazarus from the dead, and he weeps. So why does Jesus weep when he's about to do one of the most stunning miracles? And the answer is because he stood at all of our graves that day. He stood at my grave that day. Because death is a vandal. And Jesus was looking head on at what the fall meant. And so we hold those two things together. Another question? Oh, right over this side.
Hi guys. Just thinking about when you're in conversation with someone, I've talked with someone before who was experiencing a bereavement, and they said it's not helpful when you say, I know how you're feeling. Are there any other buzzwords or scenarios that you can think of that aren't helpful and what you'd prefer instead?
Good question. Do you want to go first?
I found it very difficult when people asked me, how are you? And once I gave the answer, surviving, and this woman looked absolutely taken aback, and I thought, oops, I've said the wrong thing here. And from then on, I always said, all right, thank you. And so every time I was asked that question, I was lying to people because I certainly wasn't all right. Somebody asked me, are you keeping well? And I could answer that honestly. And to me, I felt that it meant she knew I wasn't all right, but she had found another question to ask me about how I was.
I think language is important. I think something I found was the phrase, you're handling this all so well, was a difficult one. We're both sitting up here today and we're able to talk quite openly about what's happened with Rick. There was a point where, I'd be doing this and talking with people and saying, oh, you're handling this all so well. And I'd sit there thinking, should I be crying? If I'm not crying, does that mean that I didn't love him as much?
Yeah.
And the guilt that kind of built up inside. So it's the, but then when I was more honest with people, you get the flip side, and then people get really worried. Like when I'd say, I don't trust God, and I'd get the panic of, oh no, she's not okay, she's losing her faith. It's like you can't win. But I think it's, recognising that there's going to be a whole range of emotions, and what we see on the outside doesn't necessarily match what somebody's feeling on the inside.
Do you find it irritating when someone says, how are you? And you respond, and then they say, no, really, how are you?
Yeah. It's the head tilt that gets me.
How
you doing?
Yeah.
Every now and again, I still get it. How you doing? And I'm like, just let's talk normal. But I found the same as Kathy. It was a long time before when somebody said, how are you? That I'd say anything other than, I'm not too bad. I was like, I can't say I'm good. Life isn't good. It's not going to be good again. And I didn't feel I deserved or could ever say, I'm good. So I just go with, I'm not too bad, thanks.
Andy, waving at you, Hannah, this is great.
Okay, this is a question from James. This is probably for Kathy. What is the dream or prayer for how this book will be used? Has God given you one for it, or has it just been a step of faith and trust in one thing at a time? And I do feel partly responsible for tonight, actually, when I spoke with Helen. But yeah, is there a dream? Was there a purpose behind it?
Yes, it very much was. I had two reasons for writing it, really. One was to share all the things that God had taught me and the way he provided for me, and just to show how God can be with you in really dark places. I thought that, it was to encourage people in their faith. And the second reason was to be totally honest about how awful it is to lose a child, how devastating that is. Because when you read other people's experiences, it can kind of validate your own feelings. You can kind of think, it's not just me that feels like this, it's other people too. And that I found that really helpful, so I wanted to do the same for other people.
Just along from Andy. Thank you.
Do you find over the years that gradually you're beginning to look back more on the happy memories? Because he sounds an amazing guy, and thank you for writing the book. I think it will help a lot of people. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I can. At first, every memory just hurts, and you just don't want to go there with anything. gradually I have been able to cope with the happier memories, yes. I think there are still some, a lot of things are bittersweet. So you can enjoy things and yet at the same time there's pain.
And photos?
I do have trouble with photos, yes. That's why I'm sitting with my back to the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's understandable, isn't it? Do you find photos hard?
I think we're almost opposite. Whereas I still have a trouble with the music and leaving the premises, I've found photos easier. Like, photos have always been important to me.
You're a photographer.
Yeah. I did find it hard choosing the photos to put up today and going back through our wedding album in particular. To try and select one picture was particularly challenging. But we do still have pictures of Rick up in the house. They're subtle, but they're there. But yeah.
Thanks for that question. Oh, do you know this bloke?
How do you deal with the fact that when you get hit by another one of those waves, that it feels the same as it did 10 years ago? Because I got no idea what you've gone through other than from your side. That sounds horrific. How do you deal with that?
No, it's a good question. Always slightly nervous when he gets the microphone. It's hard, in all honesty, because when the waves hit, it does feel as if Rick died yesterday, and that it takes you straight back there. And it can be really unpredictable when that happens. I say 10 years on and that still happens. The waves happen less, but when they hit, it's hard, and it's finding a way then to work through it. If I can find a quiet space, I will. It's not always possible. A couple of years ago at Big Church Festival, Casting Crowns were performing, and again back on the music side, I thought they would play all their big hits. People may not know this song. If you don't, I encourage you to look it up. They've done a beautiful song called "Scars in Heaven." I didn't expect them to play it. They did, and it was like a ton of bricks had been dropped on my head, and I just sat there in this field with however many thousand people and just cried. It was all I could do. But it sounds odd, but in some ways I can't use the word nice, but the memories of Rick haven't faded. They won't fade. And in some ways, I don't want that to lessen. Do you want to say anything about triggers and waves?
Yes, it's the unexpectedness of it, isn't it? You're sort of fine one minute and then something just hits you and you're not totally sideways. There are still times of the year I really struggle with Christmas. Yeah. And then that sort of leads on to 31st of January, which is a really difficult time for me. So that's not, it's just that whole thing is just a really bad time of year. Sometimes, it's going to sound strange, but sometimes I can almost feel the shock of Rick's death again. If I suddenly, catch myself suddenly thinking about it, and it will hit me all over again. Mm-hmm. And you think, it's nearly 10 years on, why am I still shocked by this? But that's how it feels.
You said, we talked earlier about Rick not having a tuneful voice, and you said the last Christmas, he was singing a carol, and it sounded pretty good.
It did. And I've actually, since talking to you, I've actually looked up, and it can take till the mid-20s for the voice to stabilise. And I just wonder if that's what happened with him, and towards the end he could sing.
Which is amazing, isn't it? Yeah. Didn't you say it was one of the ones is it Gloria? It's got a long line in it that goes on and on and on. Yeah. You said he sounded great. Miracles happen. Back with Andy, and then we'll do one more question after.
Yeah, this is a question. We actually have members from Rosebery Park Baptist Church here today. But I wonder from your perspective, Helen, and Ian might fill in as well, how did Rick's church deal with his loss and the impact on the church and its ministry, I guess both immediately, but then, as a legacy as well?
It hit the church community hard. So Rick had been kind of instrumental in setting up the children's and the youth ministry. It's funny, there's a lot from those initial windows that is still foggy in my brain, so I will pass over to Ian in a minute, who may know more. But I think that was one of my big worries, is that the children's ministry, like how would that continue? It has continued. The church, other people in the church took on the ministry. It was a good friend of ours who stepped into the role officially after Rick as well and took it on. And I had a good chat with her about the legacy that Rick had left. But yeah, it was hard.
It was tough. And although I knew about Rosebery Park, it was only after Rick's death that I got to know the church much, much better. And was really quite blown away by what a resilient group of folks. Small church, not strong in terms of age group or finance or anything like that, but I think they grew through faith. Don't know whether you'd agree, those members, and just sought to honour Rick's legacy. I think that's probably the best way to express it. One more question. I feel like an auctioneer. Right there in the back next to Sarah.
You've told us about some wonderful things tonight, and you told us about things which were done for you. And I particularly was hit by what Andy did with the support package and going to Tesco or whatever a supermarket was. What were the things which were done for you which were really helpful? And do you now appreciate flowers or not?
We got to the... do I tell this story? We got to the point with flowers where my parents had to go to all the local charity shops and buy more vases. Flowers are lovely, but they were quite overwhelming, I will be honest. The things that were great were the real practical things. Like, often I think we say quite naturally, or let me know if there's anything I can do. Someone that's been bereaved, and especially when it's been a shock bereavement, they don't know what they need. Hadn't got a clue. Somebody that said, let me know if I can do anything. I was never going to take them off on it because A, I didn't know what I needed, and B, I didn't want to be a burden. I already felt like a burden on those that were supporting. I wasn't going to add to it. But the things that were helpful were the people that took initiative and just did those real practical things. So I say, like the care package that the students did. I say Moorlands community were hugely rocked by Rick's death as well. He was known to the staff team and the students here. So that was really touching. I had a friend write me a letter with her memories of Rick. That was really important. I had people that would go to the shops and do their grocery shopping and then turn up at my door and say, I was doing my shopping and while I was there I picked you up some stuff. Small tip, don't buy things that are perishable. Raw chicken went straight in the freezer. I had no capacity to cook. I still can't cook, but that's beside the point. So, great, but that was such a blessing, like going out to the shops, dealing with other people, facing crowds of people wasn't something I was able to do. So I would encourage you to, if there's anything practical you can think of or anywhere you can help them. I mean, Ian and Ruth, you guys were instrumental in that, and coming with me to do things like registering the death at the council offices, something I had no clue how to do, all the phone calls that have to be made, like just to have that kind of army of support in a practical way was just invaluable for me.
I think we felt that too. Every time I came down here, I just felt the strength of the people, both from the church and from the college, and that really, really helped me. And I mean, it helped in practical ways. I mean, the students were on block placement, and we had their cottage so that we could come down and be involved with Helen in planning the Thanksgiving service and everything, and that was absolutely wonderful. And we just saw what everyone was doing for Helen, and we really felt we'd seen love in action.
In a moment, Andy's going to come back and share a little bit about how you can help the college. Rick was passionate about Moorlands. He really was. Both of you wanted to go on into theological education, didn't you? And you didn't make any secret of that when you talked about it. Out of interest, who won the academic prize that year?
I did. Rick won Student of the Year. He won the student prize.
But was it by 1 mark?
It was very close. Yeah. Steve Brady didn't let him forget that.
No, amazing. But he really was passionate about the college and worked in the PR department. Rosebery Park couldn't afford to have him full-time on the staff, so the other bit of his life was here. And he helped with our advertising, promotion, and he was a great ideas man, wasn't he? Really good graphic design, but full of ideas. And it'd be appropriate for Andy just to mention a little bit about how you can support the college going forward. But Kathy, you finish your book with a great verse from Ephesians 3. And I want to read it and then pray. It says this: "Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us. To him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen." Let's pray for a moment. Lord, what a wonderful benediction, what a wonderful doxology that just puts you at the center and reminds us that you are a God who can do far more than all we ask or imagine. We just lift our hearts to you in praise and worship and say, Lord, when we can't understand you, please help us to trust you. And I thank you for the way in which Helen and Kathy have been so open tonight in sharing just a little bit of their story. We've been able to glimpse the top of the iceberg, but we pray that you'd continue with them, for David and Kathy, for Helen and Dave, as they move forward in their faith. And we pray that you'd use this book to be a blessing to many, many people. And we pray this in faith, in Jesus' name. Amen. Helen and Kathy.
Absolutely incredible, and I've been privileged to be a co-tutor with Helen for a number of years, and wonderful. I know there's been so many graduates and friends and family joining online, so thank you so much for making time. There is always Amazon. If you're online, go to Amazon, do go ahead and buy the book. We have 10 copies left for those here who weren't able to get one earlier. We do actually have 10 left, so do access those. I would encourage everybody in the room to sign up to be a friend of Moorlands. We give a monthly newsletter of all the things that go on here. And I've already heard tonight of a few people who just came across this event on Facebook and came along because they thought, wow, that'd be a fantastic event to be at. And as at Moorlands, we are really committed to equipping people passionate about Jesus to impact the church and world. And so we do that through resources, through book launches. We've done a few of those, and other events. Our equipped evenings where we dig into the Bible, apologetics, whatever it is. And so we make as many resources available. We've got an apologetics resource at the moment for working with young people in youth groups, free to download on our media page. But please follow us on social media. We also recognize that for some people, giving to something is a fantastic thing that you can do, and leaving legacies and leaving something to support students in terms of bursaries, students who only survive and get through because people have been generous and given to our student bursary scheme. So I'd encourage you, if that's something that you'd like to do and take part in, it makes such a difference to us. So do go online. There's ways to be able to give, support the college. Follow us so that you get all the latest news as we continue to equip people for the great work that's out there. And tonight, just hearing some of those stories and being part of that family that's been Moorlands, I've just been so encouraged. I hope you have too. Do talk about this, do share some of these stories and encourage people. The live stream will be available afterwards, so if people want to access this again, we've captured it tonight to be able to go back to. That's all for this evening. Thank you so much for taking the time to come out here. It's been a lovely day and a fantastic evening, so bless you. Let's just have a second round of applause. It's been wonderful.
Well done.